Hi, everyone. We're just going to give it a few seconds to let some more people trickle in, and then we'll kick it off from there. Thank you. All right, and now's a better time than ever, I think. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our exciting Climate Week event on the impacts of the New York State Accelerated Renewable Energy Growth and Community Benefit Act. Before I introduce our moderator for today, a quick note from the host of today's event. The New York City Environmental Law Leadership Institute, also known as NYCELLI, is an annual seminar for a select group of environmental attorneys committed to environmental leadership. Now, the class of 2020 includes 14 inspiring attorneys, all focused on environmental action in the New York City area. Now, of the 14, I'm honored to be in the group of 3 other attorneys who have come together to host this event for you all as part of our class 2020 project. My colleagues include Julia Minch, who's an associate attorney at Super Law Group, Dane Warren, who's an associate attorney at Saif, Paget, and Rizal, Madeline Scholar, who's an associate attorney at Levi Komberg LLP, and myself, Houtan, who's the EV100 program manager for North America at the Climate Group, who also are the host of Climate Week New York City. Now for some administrative points before we kick it off. This webinar is being recorded and it'll be shared afterwards. And please do type your questions in the dedicated question box in the control panel, and Kit, our moderator, will get to at the end. Additionally, there are several handouts for you to check out, including all the bios for the speakers. Now, with all that kind of put to the side, it's my pleasure to introduce someone who I've had the honor to work with, learn from, and now engage with as colleagues. Kit Kennedy is the Senior Director of Climate and Clean Energy at the NRDC, and she oversees NRDC's advocacy at the state and regional level. She's a climate guru, and I can't wait to see where this conversation goes today with her as our moderator. I leave it now with Kit, who will introduce our amazing panelists and speakers and kick it off from there. Kit, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Houtan, and it's really great to be reconnected with you in this role. And I also want to thank NYCELLI for organizing this important webinar, and to thank all of you who have tuned in to join us during what might otherwise be the cocktail or dinner hour. And we're gathered here today to talk about a hugely important topic: how New York State can grow enough renewable energy to meet the ambitious renewable energy goals of the community leadership of the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act. And we have a top panel of experts convened this evening to tackle that topic. As you know, New York State passed the CLCPA in 2019 and followed up earlier this year with passing the New York State Accelerated Renewable Energy Growth and Community Benefit Act. And the goal of the Renewable Energy Growth and Community Benefit Act is to expedite the siting of renewable energy projects in New York State while also addressing community benefits and community needs. And we have a great group of experts to walk us through what's important about this law, how it's being implemented, and how everyone on the webinar can engage in this. So I'll briefly introduce our 3 panelists. Their full bios, which are super impressive, are in the chat, so you can read them yourself. We'll be hearing first from Houtan Moaveni, and Houtan has joined us. You'll be able to hear him, but he's not on camera, so you won't be able to see him. And Houtan has had a long career focused on clean energy and climate, with a special focus on renewables. And he has an extensive background of public and private sector experience. He is currently serving as Deputy Executive Director of the first in the nation New York State Office of Renewable Energy Siting. And Houtan, we're so excited to have you in this position and really to lead New York State forward and the nation forward on how we site renewable energy in an expedited and sustainable fashion. Next, we'll hear from Mike Gerrard. Mike is the Andrew Sabin Professor of Professional Practice at Columbia Law School and one of the leading environmental lawyers in the country. At Columbia, he directs the Sabin Center for Climate Change Law, and he's a renowned author. And amongst his many books and articles, he published a great book last year with John Dernbach called Legal Pathways to Deep Decarbonization in the United States. And Mike himself wrote the renewables chapter of that guidebook, which I really recommend to everyone, and is really thinking deeply about how we can expedite renewable energy and meet our state and our country's renewable energy goals. And Miles Farmer is an amazing clean energy expert and lawyer. I call him a rising star, but I think it's at this point it's more accurate simply to say that he's a star. Miles has served in many roles in the climate and clean energy sector across the private and nonprofit and government sectors, including as my colleague at NRDC some years back. Most recently, Miles was a senior policy advisor on Governor Cuomo's energy team, and in that role, he coordinated with agency leadership to develop, manage, and execute the state's major energy policy initiatives. And during that time, the state engaged in some really spectacular climate legislation, including the CLCPA and the Accelerated Renewable Energy Growth and Community Benefit Act. Miles is currently in private practice as an energy lawyer and policy expert. So here's what we're going to do this evening. Each of our panelists will start with 3 minutes of opening remarks, followed by some moderated Q&A, which I will lead. And then we'll have 15 minutes for audience Q&A. So please put your questions into the chat box whenever they occur to you, and we'll gather them up and ask your question to our panelists at the end of the panel. To start, I've asked each of our panelists to talk about their perspective on why the New York State Accelerated Renewable Energy Growth and Community Benefit Act is important for New York State to achieve its climate goals. Houtan, we're going to ask you to go first, and we're also going to ask you to describe the role of your new office, the Office of Renewable Energy Siting, in implementing the new law. Houtan, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Kit. Good evening, everyone. I hope you are all well and staying safe. Before I begin, I want to give a great deal of thanks to Houtan and his team for this opportunity and making this event happen. It's truly an honor and privilege for me to be on a panel with you, Kit, Professor Gerrard, and my good friend, Miles. And really look forward to the discussion for the next hour or so. By way of introduction, my name is Houtan Moaveni. I'm serving as the Deputy Executive Director for the new Office of Renewable Energy Siting. And as you suggested, Kit, I assume most folks on the call are familiar with the new office, but just to set the stage, as one of the key components of the new Accelerated Renewable Energy Growth and Community Benefit Act, and probably if you agree, the rest of panelists, like for the remaining part of this meeting, let's just call it the new act, it's easier. State of New York created the first in the nation Office of Renewable Energy Siting to improve and streamline the process for siting large-scale renewable energy project, and this office will coordinate and undertake environmental review and permitting of large-scale renewable energy facilities, and the office will have the authority to issue a single permit for the construction of these facilities. The permit that to be issued by the new office will include all the necessary approvals from both state and local perspective. However, applicants will be required to obtain federal and federally delegated permit. So moving forward, I think since April of this year, all large-scale renewable energy projects larger than 25 megawatt will be required to obtain a permit from the Office of Renewable Energy Siting for new construction or expansion. projects that are under the current Public Service Law Article 10 process, they may remain in the same Article 10, or they may elect to opt into the new process. I think I'm a little bit over my 3 minutes, so Kit, I'll give it back to you, or I'll ask the Professor Gerrard to take it from here.
Thank you, Houtan. And Mike, please give us your perspective on what makes the Renewable Energy Act so important. And we do need a better acronym for this new law.
Speaking of poor acronyms, we have the CLCPA, which I once tried to call ClickPad. Nobody bought that. But anyway, its requirement of zero emissions electricity by 2040 essentially is going to mean that all of the natural gas-fired power plants in New York State are going to have to shut down unless they have carbon capture and sequestration, which seems highly unlikely. New York is also shutting down the Indian Point nuclear power plant. And so there's a whole lot of existing generation that is going to have to be replaced. In addition, the requirement in 2050 that we have an 85% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions statewide essentially means that all passenger vehicles are going to have to be electric. And it also means that much of the building heating and cooling and water heating is going to have to be electric. So we're cutting back on the existing capacity of generation. We're also greatly increasing the demand. The Climate Action Council, the group set up to come up with a plan for the CLCPA, hired a consulting firm called E3, which has come out with a report that estimates that as a result of all this energy demand, rather electricity demand in the state is going to go up somewhere between 65 and 80%. And so all of this adds up to a requirement for an absolutely enormous increase in wind and solar generating capacity. This E3 study said that by 2050, wind capacity in the state is going to have to go from the current 2 gigawatts to 25 gigawatts, and the solar capacity, which is now under 3 gigawatts, is going to have to go to 46 gigawatts. So the siting challenge takes center stage. We're going to need at least dozens and maybe hundreds of these wind and solar facilities. And if siting them is knockdown, drag out, years-long processes like it has been for some time, we're never going to get there. So there are extremely high stakes in making this new siting law work and work well and quickly.
Thank you, Mike. And Miles, please give us your take. Why is this new renewable energy law such a big deal?
Thanks, Kit. Yeah, so I mean, as Mike mentioned, the scale of build out of new resources that the new laws entail is just absolutely massive. And I would urge people to not underestimate the importance of the transmission and distribution planning provisions of the law. Because as you have that significant electrification of transportation and heating, a lot more load, and a build out of new resources that are located in large part at quite a bit of distance from the load, where you have northern and western New York with significant wind and solar resources, and then offshore wind that is, of course, offshore. And so the challenge is to get transmission built that will bring all of that new energy to the load centers. Already we're seeing renewables being curtailed in northern and western New York, and that problem could grow significantly if we're not smart about building out the transmission system. And in particular, the siting challenges of transmission are quite substantial as well. In addition to the siting of renewables, you've got this all needs to be built, much of it down the Hudson Valley, not an easy place to build, or for offshore wind on Long Island, again, a lot of siting challenges. And so the law is pretty unprecedented in targeting a state level transmission planning process of this scale. Perhaps the only other kind of analog at this level is Texas's massively successful renewable energy zone initiative that linked transmission to the Panhandle. But this is an even bigger scale. There are more jurisdictional challenges at play. And I think the law does a lot of good by coordinating all of the relevant state agencies, the utilities and NYSO, aiming them at the state's renewable energy goals, focusing on the build out of both the distribution and the bulk electric system. And as we'll probably get into, giving NYPA substantial new powers that will allow a lot of this to be done very quickly, which is another part of the challenge.
Thank you, Miles. And now we're going to move into kind of the moderated Q&A portion of the panel. And folks in the audience, we really want to hear from you too, so please use the chat function to post your questions and we will get to them. And apologies. I also want to note that, sorry about this. I want to note that we have 3 handouts that are available to everyone in the audience. We have panelist bios, if you want to take a look at that. We have the text of the new siting law itself. We have a Paget Roselle blog on the new Office of Renewable Energy Siting. And before long, we're going to post the new draft regulations, which just came out the other week. So this is very timely. So take a look at those handouts, and they provide more details moving forward. So I'm going to start with a question for all 3 of you, and I'm going to ask you to be somewhat succinct in providing responses, because we have a lot of great questions to get through. And so just starting at a very high level, we have the super ambitious renewable energy mandate in the CLCPA, as Mike mentioned. We have a whole variety of challenges in terms of the scale of renewables that is called for. Miles has mentioned that the transmission problem. And what do you each see as the main potential challenges to success in achieving the new siting law's objectives? And what do New York State and stakeholders need to overcome those challenges? I know that's a big question, but give us your top level answer. And Houtan, let's start with you.
Sure. So I'll try to answer this question from the more specifically New York State perspective and the Office of Renewable Energy Siting. And I would ask Professor Gerrard and Miles to answer the question primarily from maybe the other stakeholders' perspective. So I would, again, I personally believe that the new law and the proposed regulations are showing a fast forward thinking of how renewable energy projects should be sited in an environmentally responsible manner without sacrificing a lot of factors when it comes to this type of projects. Specifically with respect to the challenge, I look at this from the perspective of implementation of the new law and the regulation, and the ability of the new office to meet this very ambitious deadlines that we have throughout this new process. In some cases, a permit must be issued in a year, and if the project is proposed on a landfill or brownfield in 6 months, and even within 6 months or within 1 year, for the folks that are familiar with the new law, there are some binding timelines that the new office must comply with. So I would find that, I would say, from my perspective, the #1 challenge with respect to the new law and regulation would be implementation and the compliance with very ambitious timelines associated with the new law.
Mike, Mike or Miles, jump in, and what do you see as the key challenges, and how are we going to overcome them?
Well, I'll go next. I very much hope that the staff of the new office is large enough, that there's enough of a budget, because there's going to be a very large volume of applications to process. And if they're understaffed, they're not going to be able to push them out quickly enough. So speed is going to be an important issue. Another issue that we've unfortunately seen with quite a few renewable projects in New York State is local opposition. But often people don't want wind turbines or solar farms near them. Our Center at Columbia has started something called the Renewable Energy Legal Defense Initiative, which provides pro bono legal help to community groups that want these facilities. But we've seen over and over again that we don't have buy-in from the local community, and that creates a lot of tensions. There are some mechanisms built into the law that we'll presumably talk about a little later, but that potential tension, I think, is another real obstacle that will have to be overcome.
Miles, how about you?
Yeah, so I guess, going last, the key points have been covered. But maybe I'll offer a gloss. I think the volume of projects coupled with the timelines is going to make it quite challenging to, offer the real substantive engagement on all of the issues and to address stakeholder concerns for all of those projects in the manner that they deserve. So, like Mike, and I'm sure Houtan, I would hope that the new office is adequately staffed. That's really critical. And with I also think it's critical to maintain support of local communities. And there's certainly a temptation for developers in seeing this law. The state has the ability to cite the projects, to rely on that as a crutch to overcome community opposition. And that's not going to work for the state in the long run. And so I think that it's really important to find ways to highlight the local economic benefits that these projects will bring, to continue to encourage developers to work very closely with communities to find solutions that they want. And like Mike mentions, there are some features of the law built in to help direct the process in that manner.
Great, and we'll get to those features soon. But first, Mike, a quick question for you. You're an expert at the national level on renewable energy and renewable energy siting. What are other states doing to accelerate renewable energy growth? And with the new law, the new office, the draft regs, where is New York positioned as a leader in this area?
Well, New York is one of about a dozen states that has adopted a 100% clean electricity standard. Hawaii, California, New Jersey, Connecticut, Virginia, Wisconsin, Colorado, Maine, Nevada, Washington, and New Mexico also have 100% electricity goals, either in statute or in executive order. Not many of them have adopted new renewable siting laws. There's something in New Mexico. There are some efforts in Oregon, but I have to say, not many of them needed a new renewable siting law as much as New York did, because the New York process has been exceptionally slow. In 2011, the state legislature amended a law called Article 10, which was designed to speed up the siting of these and permitting of these facilities. It didn't do that. The first facility that was a renewable facility that was finally approved, it took until 2018. Since then, 7 other facilities have been permitted. Not one of them is in operation yet. So we had this tortuously slow process. So New York was badly in need of a new statute, and I'm very happy that we have one and very much hope it works.
Great. And let's turn now to some features of the new law, and in particular, the interaction with communities. And I think as I think you, Mike and Miles, you both mentioned, we've seen communities in New York State embrace large-scale wind and solar. The Maple Ridge project comes to mind in Lewis County. We've seen communities resist large-scale renewable projects, and we've certainly seen communities just have a lot of questions about how to approach the question of siting renewables, what they need to know, what types of mitigation they should be thinking about, etc. So let's kind of delve into that. And Houtan, the first question is for you. The new renewable energy siting law proposes benefits for communities that host renewable energy facilities. give us a little background and flavor of that, and what kind of benefits are being contemplated.
Sure. There are, I would say, two elements to your question. One is the actual statute requires the office to, in the actual permit, require applicants to provide some form of community benefits, and that can be in different forms of host community benefits, host community agreements, or the payment only of taxes pilot, or any types of agreement. Specifically, actually, the statute requires the Public Service Commission to establish a host community benefit program through which the owners of major renewable energy facilities will fund a benefit for electric distribution utility customers located in the host communities. When Miles was with the New York State, we were working on this even before this law was passed. That from my travel across New York State, this has been one of the main concerns of local communities, that they would like to directly benefit from this renewable energy project in hosting their community. As far as I know, DPS staff they are in the process of developing and issuing a white paper for public comment, and I do expect that white paper to come out hopefully in the next couple of months. What I can share with you, essentially, without getting into too much trouble, it's essentially an electricity discount scheme that will provide discounted electricity to host community members. This is very important, as I said, from community's perspective. Personally, I think it's a very good idea that's right now part of the new law. Having said that, I think something else that we should really consider is renewable energy projects, wind and solar projects. They have relatively very tight profit margin, especially solar projects. So money here and there, like, can make or break a solar project. So I am concerned. I for one, am concerned about some of the cumulative impact of, if you will, multiple either community benefits or other types of the new act that may make some of this project financially unviable. But that's something I think that it would be, again, as a part of the effort that my colleagues from the Department of Public Service are working on it, and the white paper will be open for the stakeholders' input.
Thank you. And Miles and Mike, real quick, what do you think, how can we encourage communities to embrace these renewable energy projects and avoid NIMBYism? And Houtan has spoken to aspects of the law which incent that, but what more broadly should we be doing as stakeholders and as a state to encourage embracing renewable energy?
Well, we certainly need early community consultation. Don't just, announce in a press release that this is going to be built next to you. We need to tell the people right away and talk to them about the benefits and how it fits into the overall effort to have a clean energy system, to fight climate change and all of the other benefits. We also need to shoot down some of the misinformation that is out there about the impacts of these kinds of facilities. There are groups that are putting out false narratives about the negative impacts or exaggerating them, and I think we have to have good answers to many of those objections.
Miles?
Yeah, I think those are both good steps. And in addition to that, I think there has been a lot of good action from groups like New Yorkers for Clean Power that are building local support and reaching out to local community members that are engaged in supportive of projects. I think that is very important. And then also that projects work to find partnerships with local landowners and businesses that work for them. And groups to work on those, which may be unique to a region, but to kind of channel the economic benefits toward things that the communities really want.
Thank you. And also just using my moderator's privilege, getting the siting right and strong environmental review and mitigation is really important too. And I also just want to give a little infomercial PSA for New Yorkers for Clean Power. They're going to be hosting an online teach-in or webinar in mid-November for renewable energy advocates to explain the new draft rules under the Renewable Energy Act. So if you're interested in joining in on that, you can reach out to Bet Abroad and go to New York nyforcleanpower.org to get more information. And let's turn to those draft regs because they are really hot off the presses. They just came out a couple of weeks ago. And Houtan, let's start with you. Can you give us just a very brief overview of the draft regs, the conditions that all renewable energy projects will have to meet, and tell us how stakeholders and everyone on this webinar can engage in the public comment period?
Thanks, Kit, for sure. As you know, under the statute, the Act requires the office to establish comprehensive regulations and a set of uniform standards and conditions for this projects within a year. And as you mentioned, the office issued the draft regulations and the uniform standards and conditions last week. The proposed regulations, I would say, we can categorize them in two major parts. The first one, essentially, the first package would be regarding the application requirement, certain information about the actual, like how the process will work, a series of, I would say, procedural details. And the second package, which is the uniform standards and conditions, are specific for solar and land-based wind. As you mentioned, the draft regs are available on our website for public comment. Before the final adoption of the uniform standards and conditions, we will, in addition to the SAPA process, we will be holding 5 public hearings across the state, as well as 2 virtual public hearings. And I encourage everyone to check our website for more information on the public hearing. Again, just to, I can take advantage of the time I have, and like all the stakeholders and public have an opportunity to formally submit comments on the first package until November 16, on the second package, which is the draft uniform standards and conditions, until December 6, 2020. But just to give you an overview of the 2 regulatory packages, as I mentioned, the first package specify application content, some of the pre-application requirements, the type of notices that must be provided throughout the multiple milestones that we have, requirements for seeking intervener funding, and among other procedural requirements. Just very high level, the structure of the permit application includes 25 exhibits addressing various technical, legal, and policy related matters. And the second package, the uniform standards and conditions, really the best way I can describe it, essentially the intent was like to have this uniform standards and conditions function as a menu of generic condition or model permit condition that will apply to wind and solar facilities. And really the intent here is to limit the need for site-specific conditions and minimize the need to negotiate issues that are common to the majority of these renewable energy projects. So if I have to just share information about our thinking behind designing the regulation and the uniform standards and condition, is really to guide applicants to avoid and minimize major siting issues in the first instance, and if that's not possible, specify mitigation options to address unavoidable impacts. So the way that the application process essentially has been designed is like we're trying to drive applicants toward compliance with these uniform standards and condition. Again, of course, for the folks that they have been involved with large-scale development, they know there is no such thing as one size fit all, and I do not expect that the uniform standards and conditions can address every impact for every project. And we do expect that the actual permit will be a mixture of uniform standards and conditions with some site specific condition. If I may, just overall, like the architect of the new regs, if you follow the project development and the steps that our developers that they have to follow, the first part is like we are trying to, with respect to the avoidance and minimization, there are some pre-application steps that we are trying to, as much as we can, in a binding way, guide applicants to site projects in an environmentally responsible manner, and that's with respect to wetland delineation, stream delineation, the types of T&E habitat surveys that they need to do, any significant archaeological and historical site-sensitive impacts, as well as, I think, as Mike mentioned, consultation with local governments and communities as early on as possible. And then really throughout the application process, ask for relevant information, providing specific standard and design criteria in order to show compliance with the uniform standards and conditions.
Thank you, Houtan. You covered a lot there. And I'm just very quickly going to ask Miles first and then Mike. I'm sure you've dug into the draft regs. Do you think, and I'm not going to hold you to this in terms of any final comments, but are directionally, what do you see the regs as going in the right direction? And have you spotted anything that might needed to be strengthened?
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's just a tremendous effort by Houtan and his team, and having seen some of this from the inside, I mean, the amount of work entailed to address the breadth of issues involved, it's really encouraging to see them standardize and kind of set a reasonable set of expectations around projects in so many different areas. And I think the regs, for those who've been at it a while, may look like something that could have been issued under Article 10, in that there was a big push to standardize all the conditions. And a big problem there was just everybody fighting over every last one of these issues. And I think, coupled with the timelines of the new law, this is what will make those achievable, because you'll avoid the wrangling over so many minute issues, and also avoid the kind of heightened tensions that go along with having disputes. I think having kind of this set of default rules is a really great step forward.
Mike, what's your take?
I was very happy to see that they came out so quickly. I'm delighted to see the standard conditions. I think, as Miles and Houtan said, I think that'll clear away a lot of the disputes and should make it easier to negotiate the site-specific permits. I am a little concerned that the tremendous level of detail in the application forms will take a lot of work and a long time to prepare. It's calling for a level of study and documentation that is comparable to what you would expect in a full environmental impact statement under the State Environmental Quality Review Act, and those can take a long time. I'm sure there are consulting firms out there that will figure out how to do it and do it quickly, and I'm looking forward to seeing that go forward. But I was worried when I looked at the many pages of description of all the, 25, however many exhibits it was that are necessary, that's an enormous amount of work. And I hope that can all be done on an expeditious basis. And I hope that it doesn't slow things down unduly. Because they all meet important and entirely legitimate environmental concerns. So the question is, do there have to be trade-offs between the time and the level of detail? That's one of the difficult issues that may have to be faced down the road.
Great. And then turning to a slightly different topic, although it's all connected, Miles, you talked about the importance of transmission in your opening remarks. Can you sort of add a little bit more to that? Why is transmission so important to meeting the CLCPA goals? And how is the transmission challenge addressed in the new siting law?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, I think it's really the coupling of the significant amount of increased load that will come on as a result of buildings and transportation electrification, coupled with the fact that we're building out resources that are located all across the state. And transmission planning and development takes a very long time. You talk to transmission developers, I think they measure projects on like a decade-long basis. And so that's a real challenge. I think there's also a challenge in that NYSO is the operator of the bulk electricity system in the state, which is regulated by FERC. And so this law addresses the fact that the state has siting authority over those bulk electric transmission projects. It also has planning authority, and it's structured to address utility distribution plans. It calls for each utility to develop their own local plan, and then it also calls for NYSERDA to lead a process that incorporates all of the state agencies and NYSO and the utilities in developing a grid study that looks at what needs to be done on the bulk level.
Great, and I have one more question myself, and then we'll turn to the audience Q&A. Mike, tell us about the connection, if any, between the new renewable energy siting law and New York City's climate goals and the local law 97 for setting greenhouse gas standards for buildings.
Right, so local law 97, which was adopted by the New York City Council last year, puts very aggressive requirements on buildings in New York City to greatly reduce their greenhouse gas emissions, and counted in the emissions from the buildings are the emissions from the sources of electricity they acquire. And so this is creating an enormous desire on the part of the New York City real estate industry for there to be a whole lot of renewable energy capacity out there so they can contract with it and they can buy this zero emissions electricity. So the New York City real estate industry has all of a sudden turned into big advocates of renewable energy around the state and imported from Canada. So there is a very close relationship, and without the success of the siting law, it's going to be very hard for these building owners to comply because they're not going to be able to buy enough clean electricity to meet the standards.
Thanks. So there's a lot at stake here with the new renewable siting law. So let's turn now to the audience questions, and we have some great audience questions here. We'll tackle as many as we can and keep putting them into chat as they occur to you. Miles, as our transmission expert, we have a question about what is being done to improve the transmission system in New York. Is this a government task or more for the private sector? And is there enough private capital available to support necessary wind and solar projects?
Yeah, so the answer is all of the above. It's going to be a massive government initiative. It's also going to be a massive private sector initiative. So at the bulk level, what the law does is, like I mentioned, it calls for this study. And then it also allows a process for priority projects to be designated by the Public Service Commission and for the New York Power Authority to build those projects potentially in partnership with private entities or with utilities. That is alongside the existing NYSO transmission planning project selection regional planning process, which has a public policy process that allows for competitive solicitations conducted by NYSO to target public policy transmission needs that are defined by the state. So we've already seen NYPA propose a couple of priority projects. The Public Service Commission and NYPA together put out a set of criteria that they think should guide what the priority project should be, and comments coming in from stakeholders. So I think we're likely to see a mix of both at the bulk level, and then at the distribution level, we will see utilities building that. And I think there is enough capital out there, but it needs to be channeled appropriately. And the key to that is to have clear rules for how the costs of these transmission projects are going to be recovered, and confidence from the investors that that's all going to work out.
Great. And Houtan, a factual question for you. You probably all know the answer. How many pending wind and solar projects are there right now in New York State, land-based?
So I think under Article 10, if I remember, at this point, maybe close to 40 or over 40 applications that, or actually more than that, like so far, I would say between 45 to 50 applications that they are pending out of and under Article 10, and then moving forward, I'm hearing a lot of good news that we are getting a lot of new applications and the new companies that are coming to New York State, and that's wonderful news. I don't have like a specific number. I want to say something in the range of probably what I'm hearing, hundreds of new applications that are being they're being developed at this point in an early phase of project development.
That is fantastic news. So another great question from a slightly different angle. NYCELLI, of course, has a great mission of training young professionals to become environmental lawyers and environmental professionals. And so what advice would the three of you offer to lawyers who are just starting out? Where are the growth opportunities in the clean energy space? And how can folks learn more about this particular space between citing clean energy and energy law, and develop their careers to emulate the three of you in your work?
Well, I guess I'll start, if I may. Only a fraction of the work involved in developing clean energy is environmental. Most of the work that is involved is transactional. It's in the financing and the permitting and the contracting and the real estate and all of those kinds of issues. So lawyers who want to get involved in this really need to study environmental law, but also study all of those other areas and energy regulation. It's just a whole broad array of areas of law that are involved in doing all of this. And there are an increasing number of law firms that are doing this kind of work. Many law firms are trying to start up clean energy practices, and there are a lot of startup businesses and a lot of ongoing established businesses that are in it. So I think working for any of those places can be very good training, and try to work through, across as many of these substantive areas as you can.
Great. Miles and Houtan, what advice would you offer the young lawyers in the audience?
I guess one thing that I kind of lucked into was to have a variety of experience that targeted the federal level and then also the state level. And I think that with the increasingly interlocking nature of state and federal programs, that is likely a good plan to try to get some mix and to target areas where they're interacting. I also think a massive growth area is likely to be focusing on the gas system. There aren't a lot of people focused on clean energy who really know gas regulations. And as we build out all of these clean energy programs, there's going to be kind of an associated task of targeting it so that they are targeted to reduce the use and expense of the gas system.
So Kit, from my perspective, as someone who is not a lawyer, as an engineer, I have to say, if I want to give an advice to our future lawyers, something that I would recommend is like to spend some time to either through an internship program or something like that to build some understanding and knowledge about the technology and I don't call it the science of siting, I call it like the art of siting renewable energy projects. And having that understanding and intuition, like honestly, is like there is no price you can put on that. I mean, we have a few colleagues on the in the group that right now they're listening that I don't want to name, but there are a lot of folks that they have developed that intuition, and I think that will like give them an absolutely head start when they are trying to like apply for jobs and you know, when in their career moving forward as well.
Great. And Houtan, a question for you. You know, one of the complexities of you know, New York State government and any level of government is there are a lot of agencies at play in the regulatory process. So how is your new office, the Office of Renewable Energy Siting, going to interact with the Department of Public Service, NYCERDA, and the whole kind of alphabet soup of New York State agencies that are involved in this process?
So we have been working, I don't want to jinx myself, but we're very well with other state agencies, with specifically Department of Public Service, my colleagues from DEC, Ag and Market, and on the actual like proposed regulations, they have been instrumental to, as Miles mentioned, from someone's like from outside perspective, I don't know how much you'll see this, but like to reach consensus on a set of standards and regulations to move forward. So like they have been very, very helpful. Moving forward, and again, on a case by case or like a project by project, under the statute, like ORES will make the final decision, but ORES is required to consult with other agencies with subject matter expertise. And that would be specifically, we'll be working with DEC, as probably you'll see in the regs. We'll be working with my colleagues from DPS, as well as Ag and Market, and also New York State Parks.
Great. We also have a question which kind of reflects Mike's comments earlier about whether this process is going to be too burdensome for renewable energy developers. The question asks, the regulations essentially move the environmental review process, wetlands delineation, etc., before the 1-year permit clock starts. How will the regulations and the Office of Renewable Energy Siting ensure that the pre-application process doesn't become unduly burdensome or lengthy? And Houtan, I think that's for you, but you know, Miles and Max, please, and Mike, please add in.
So yeah, I mean, when you look at the actual project development, some of these determinations like wetland delineation or stream delineation, or what type of T&E habitat survey that needs to be conducted, these are like the really early on in the actual like siting or like early on in the project development. So it's not a from our perspective, it's not like it would not be delaying the actual project development. Specifically, again, when you look at it, this type of activities would have happened under the previous version of the law, or other activities either under Seeker or Article 10, that that we have had, developers have had some consultation with state agencies. In this case, we are trying to provide that guidance in a binding way that will be essentially used early on to help developers to site their project in a location, and the time frame is like simply 60 days. So we are making it binding on the office to make that determination within 60 days. And there is no limitations on how close you have to be to submit an application. So from my perspective, if I'm going to develop a solar project in North Country, I can reach out to the Office of Renewable Energy Siting and I can delineate my wetland if applicable, or stream if applicable. I can do my wildlife site characterization studies and report, find out what type of surveys I need to do, if any. And if there is any significant archaeological and historical issue at the site, we can determine that early on. The reason if we are trying to do this, as I said, is to guide applicants early on so we don't get into the same application process and getting into that loop of dispute between state agencies and applicants and other parties.
Great. Now we're almost out of time, unfortunately, but among the important topics that we haven't had a chance to touch on yet is the jobs benefits of clean energy and the importance of labor in renewable energy growth and jobs. So could one of you quickly comment on the opportunities to encourage jobs for local residents from developers of renewable energy, and also what New York State is doing to ensure that these are good quality jobs and in many instances union jobs?
So one of the important elements of the CLCPA is the idea of the just transition, that the people who are going to lose their jobs because they were in fossil fuel related industries, it's not their fault that they were in that industry, and jobs need to be found for them. Training has to be supplied. It's also an important focus of the CLCPA that low-income and minority communities receive a significant portion of the benefits of this entire effort. And so the state has developed and is still developing a number of very important programs to try to locate industrial facilities, build some of the necessary components, train people, do these in the communities that need that kind of help. And so a very important policy adopted by the legislature and Governor Cuomo is to have all of this create a tremendous economic benefit for the people in New York State who need it most.
And I'll just mention too that there are requirements in New York for prevailing wage and project labor agreements for large-scale renewable energy projects. And Houtan, does the new law, or Miles, does the new law provide incentives for local residents to get project jobs?
Ask the question again, if possible.
Sorry, Houtan. Is there anything in the new renewable energy siting law which provides incentives to renewable energy developers to give neighbors of the project, community residents, jobs with respect to the projects?
So I mean, that's again is a part of, like, not something explicitly like that, but I mean, like, that essentially would be part of an application that would be, I think that's like one of the details that we would like to learn from each applicant with respect to their plan of like local hiring and beyond. But yeah.
Yeah, so it would be taken into consideration.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, and then just in terms of the last question, folks are asking again, how can they engage on the draft rules, the structure for commenting, public meetings, and all of that? Houtan, just give the website for ORES where folks can go to see all the dates. And of course, we've posted the draft regs in the handout section here, so folks should download those too.
So again, yeah, I think there are a lot of information, and I would personally make myself available to answer any follow-up question folks might have. The website is ores.ny.gov, ores.ny.gov. And also, I don't know if you, Houtan and team, can share my email address. If you can just reach out to me, I would be happy to answer your questions. And with respect to the public participations, I mean, there are events like, where you can go to our events section of the webpage. You'll see the location and dates for our public hearings and how you can register for that. With respect to how you can submit comments, like via email, but at the same time, we are working on an online portal that we can receive public comments electronically. Give me, I would say, probably another week. You should, if you go and check our website, you will see that there will be an online portal that you can enter your comments directly electronically.
Okay, that's great. Yeah.
Let me just add, if I may, that the Sabin Center at Columbia Law School has established a website called the New York State Climate Action Tracker, and also another one, the New York City Climate Action Tracker, which is going to keep track of the deadlines the CLCPA and the Renewables Law and the Environmental Justice Law and the Community Risk and Resilience Act, and the other one on Local Law 97. So you can also take a look at those sites to keep track of what's going on and to see if the state and the city are meeting all the deadlines established by the statutes.
That's great. And Houtan has entered Houtan's email in the chat. Also suggested people take a look at the Alliance for Clean Energy New York, ACE New York website, and again, New Yorkers for Clean Power. So we're out of time. I really want to thank Houtan, Mike, and Miles for great comments and fielding questions in this really important area. And Houtan and NYCELLI, thanks so much for hosting us tonight. And Houtan, maybe there's a way that we can answer the questions that we weren't able to get to in this session. And if we can do that, we will. But thanks very much and have a great, and Houtan's giving us a thumbs up on that. So thanks very much and have a great evening, everybody.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.